welcome everybody to the Bryan Foltice Behavioral Finance Podcast. My name is Dr. Bryan Foltice, and I'm an associate professor of finance at Butler University in Indianapolis, Indiana. My goal is to teach you about behavioral finance in hopes that you make better decisions with your life and your money. Today's topic, we are going to continue to talk about social forces and how they influence our decision making. So thanks for watching, and hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. If you haven't done so already, please make sure you like and subscribe to the channel so you can follow along for more. We can roll out a lot more content, services. I would love to serve you in any way. So please reach out to me and don't hesitate to ask questions or let me know how I could be of service to you. So today, though, we're going to just hop straight in. And best way to do this is typically when I teach this, we do an activity. And with this activity, as I introduce this topic, is I'm not going to introduce the topic because it's important that I don't for experimental purposes. What I have, though, people do, so let's say typically my classes are about 30. So I have 30 students, and I usually try to make it worthwhile. I don't make them come. They're come to class, but I usually get probably about 27 to 28 out of 30 showing up every day. So I'm pretty happy as a professor about that. Especially I don't have any attendance policy. So anyway, regardless, let's just say I split them into 6 different groups. So in a perfect world, all 30 are there. 6 groups. 5 each. So that means they have to choose one individual for each of the 6 groups. And I ask those 6 individuals to kindly leave the room while we talk about this exercise. And while they're gone, I explain the rules to the rest of the class. And here's the chart. So on the left side, I have a line, and my apologies for those listeners. I will try to articulate in words as best as possible. If you're going to work or walking your dog, God bless you. Thanks for listening. But I've got a line about 3 inches here, and then I have lines A, B, and C directly next to them. A is my best attempt to draw the line that's exactly the same length. And then I have B, which visually, if we look at this without overthinking it, is considerably larger. And then C is considerably smaller. So without overthinking it, A is the answer. Which one is the similar line structure, the similar length of the line? And so that's the answer. But now, for these 6 individuals who are going to be walking in, the remaining group members all need to give their best, most convincing argument that A is not the right answer. And at the end of it, we will get the decisions of those 6 decision makers on which one is the same length. They're the closest in length, A, B, or C. And so I cut them loose, and I tell the students that if you can say whatever, sometimes say, well, we talked about it, and Foltice just said there's like a visual misrepresentation, and if you look at it from a different angle, then so you just hear all these really funny arguments to try to sway these decision makers away from what at first blush is going to be pretty obvious. And usually I incentivize them and I tell them, we just have fun with it, that if the decision maker gets it right, then they get to leave early, and everybody else before they leave have to tell me something interesting about themselves that I wouldn't otherwise know. And if they don't get it, then the group members can leave early and the decision maker has to share something that interesting that I don't know. So again, we have a good time. It's a fun time, not too not too stressful, not too heavy in our classrooms. So anyway, I feel like that's the best way to learn. Nevertheless, we get them in there, bring them back into the room, explain what the purpose is. Say, we want you to tell us the closest length, A, B, or C, to the line on the left. And but we want you to talk about it with your group first. We give them a few minutes to talk about it, and then we make them lock in their answers. So I grab the 6 answers. And in experimental studies, we've seen nearly 75% of students give answers of B or C. And I told the student, I don't care which one you sway them towards, B or C, just get them off of the answer of A. And so we've seen studies of 75%. Typically in my classes, we see 40 to 50% still are swayed. And this is what I believe is really strong, because there's this self-selection bias that we've talked about before, where those who are actually stepping up to step outside are typically some of the stronger ones. So the stronger headed, they were going to actually stand up and kind of lead the team and step outside and expose themselves a little bit. So they're usually some of the stronger mental ones. And still, we're switching out to about 40% away from A. And so this is called Asch's lines, ASCHE. And this is all about conformity. That's what the topic is here at first. We're going to talk about conformity. So when people conform, they give into real or imaginary pressure and conform with whatever else, even though you can see them wrestling with it and their instinct goes, no, it's very clear, it's A. And see how people can pressure or influence them away from the real answer. And so one of the pitfalls of conformity is what we call groupthink. So this is when groups start to think alike, when somebody's on the wrong path and doesn't really know, but they're so strong in their position and their passion about it that they're just bringing everybody over. And some people are just like, I'm just not ready to fight this, or they don't know any better and they just want a shortcut. And so they'll just join them for the path of least resistance. This is how we start getting into groupthink. So when groups start to think alike. And we've seen this in experimental settings, but now we've also seen this in real life settings, in corporate settings as well. So when you think about Enron, so Enron was, their collapse and essentially coming down to their bad accounting, that they were kind of massaging the numbers accounting-wise to make them look way more profitable than they were. And it was understood from the top down that people more or less knew that this was happening, but they kind of let it slide because there was just too much money being made. And across the board, people were earning a lot of money through stock options and compensation. And so the question is, well, why didn't the board of directors actually step up? They're supposed to be the ones monitoring this, even though Jeff Skilling, who was their CEO at the time, was kind of orchestrating this. Where were the board of directors here? Because they're the ones that are supposed to be overseeing the overseers. And so this is what we're going to talk about. But before we do, so think about the ideal number of a group. So if you get too small of a group, then you don't have enough ideas floating out there, or you might miss some different perspectives. However, if you get too large of a group out there, you get what are called free riders. So you know this if you have ever been in any groups at work or in school, and once you get past, typically in my world, past 3 is when you can start really seeing some of the free riders. Everyone else will take care of it, and they're just going to skate by. But for the board of directors, they say smaller is better. But usually we see around 10 to 12 is where that size is. Anything greater is where you start getting those free riders. And we talk about the composition of boards, where it should be both insiders and outsiders, have a blend of different backgrounds. So if you look at any any different company that's a S&P 500 company, that you'll see a wide variety of people from different backgrounds. But here's the thing. One of the things that is really causing groupthink, and this goes back to Enron where it failed, is the interconnectedness. So the interconnectedness of these board of directors. So I'll post this link, but there was an article, it came out about 5 years ago here, saying that 78% of all of the top 50 companies in the S&P 500 are connected through their board of directors directly. And all these board of directors, and when you dig in even deeper to the S&P 500 board of directors and how they're connected, it's just this group of a network of people. So I want you to think about this really connected group of people once you are in. And by the way, the second point I'm going to make about groupthink in this corporate board, just to put perspective on this, is that each board member was compensated $384,000 per year at Enron during this time. So this was back in the 90s. Put it in real terms, we're at $600,000 today's money for showing up for what? Annual, quarterly meetings. So the time that they're spending per compensation is extraordinary. So they're getting heavily compensated for this. They're interconnected, very much so, in all these large companies. And we go, oh, I don't understand. Why is there tremendous groupthink? Or why did they allow this to happen when clearly there was something off with the books at Enron? And you go, well, who's going to dissent? What's the incentive to raise your hand and go, hey, I think this is faulty, or I think this needs to be examined a little bit more? Well, if you're that person, we're throwing you out. You're out of the club. And so it has really good explanation as to why there can be potential groupthinks in these board of director compositions. And so I was almost about to go down a rabbit hole, and I was looking at the McDonald's board of directors. I'll post that link as well, just in case you're interested, just to see how the boards are all connected through another large company. And it just to paint the picture of how groupthink can happen, even at the highest level of corporate America. So what's next? I'll get off of that, the conformity train, because I now want to talk about this obedience to authority. Obedience to authority. And this is something we talk about that for all of these things, there are good and bad. And so we're going to talk about hurting in a moment, which can lead to bad outcomes, but also can be good. And when we talk about this obedience to authority, we talk about from a civilization standpoint, an order standpoint, obedience to authority when the authority is positive can be a good thing. So we don't look at all of these topics from one angle, we're taking them from both. But I do want to make sure that we understand obedience to authority is a good thing, and to respect authority is a good thing, as long as the authority is truly pointing people and have intentions in the right direction. And so when the authority is negative or evil or moving, we call them bad actors, they're a bad actor and moving people in the wrong direction, then this obedience to authority can obviously have consequences. And this all comes into this conformity and groupthink, is this obedience. And so we tested this, and this was back in the 60s. This was Milgram's. He did an experiment, and I've got another link here. So I've got a lot of promises that I'm making, basically some homework for you that I want to share. But there's a YouTube link that I make this class watch. That's this Milgram's experiment, about 6 or 7 minutes, but it's very impactful. And what he does is he'll tell an individual or a participant to administer a shock across the wall to another individual. But what they didn't realize is that other individual was an actor across the wall. But basically, you would ask a question as a participant, and then if they get it wrong, you would pull the lever, and then you'd hear their reaction as they're faking getting shocked. But we didn't know the difference if you're a participant. And then the authority figure tells you, continue this questionnaire. But now we're going to move up the voltage. So you start with just a little shock, and you move it up to 450 volts. And as the shocks get heavier, you can hear the actor on the other side going, "Come on, stop, you're killing me," or like, "I have a heart condition." And you can now see the participants starting to squirm, and they're just like, "What do I do?" And the authority figure says, "You continue. You continue." It's like, "I don't know if you continue." They go, "Okay." So they continue. And it went all the way up to 450 volts of shock, which is enough to truly hurt somebody. And they said that 60 to 65% of the subjects administered that maximum amount of shock, all the way from 0 all the way up to 450 volts. And they said at least one shock. How many people administered at least a shock up through the ranks? And 100% of people actually did that. There is not one person that said, "This is wrong. I'm not going to obey this authority because it's wrong." And what they noticed in this experiment is when the person of authority says, "Look, if the guy dies, I'll take the blame from it. You just do what I say," and almost passes the blame. And so the person in the chair, they go, "Well, it's not at least my fault. Somebody said this was okay, and they're going to take the responsibility. So I'm going to act this out. I'm going to play this out even though I don't believe in it." This is really important because it starts with I don't think this is right, but if somebody else is willing to take responsibility for it or going to get blamed for it, suddenly this moves us into down the path of bad obedience, or obedience for a bad outcome. And so this was done back in the 60s, and this experiment was one of the major reasons why, as experimenters here, even to give a questionnaire or a survey, we have to do a tremendous amount of paperwork and go through a lot of processes to make sure that participants are not going to be hurt, or there isn't going to be anything. There's an institutional review board that we have to go through and fill out all this paperwork to get the green light on any particular survey. So I've got one rolled out this summer that I'm really excited about. And but yeah, the IRB stamped, done, consent form, all good. And I really, as interesting as this, I also have to thank him for all this additional paperwork, but at least it does save participants, they don't have to go through that again. All right, friends. So anyway, next, we're going to talk about, and again, we're all talking about social forces. So we've got conformity, obedience to authority, and groupthink. And then finally is this herding. So herding, H-E-R-D, not my back hurts. It's herding. And it says here, following the behavior of others. So we just follow the behaviors. And from a positive standpoint, that can be really good as it saves mental energy. So if just took a road trip this summer, just myself. I went to a St. Louis Cardinals game, just down the road, about 4 hours from where I live. Checked out a Cardinals game, And then the next night drove to Kansas City and checked out a Kansas City Royals game just to see a new ballpark and check out a couple of baseball games, have some time to myself in the car, and then just come back here because it's still summertime. I'm enjoying myself. And so I'm thinking about this herding mentality. And if I'm downtown St. Louis and I'm trying to get to the ballpark and I've got my GPS if I wanted to, but it wasn't feeling really like, just wanted to get to the ballpark. And you could see everybody dressed in Cardinal gear. And so as a mental shortcut, I just felt like there's enough people heading in this direction. I'm just going to follow them. And I'll just take in the city and see what's going on. And sure enough, they'll lead you in generally the most direct way. Because they have this inside information. If there's enough people, and you just kind of go with the flow, you move with them. And chances are you're going to find the ballpark or the stadium that you're going to just by following the herd. And that's really good most of the time. There can be times when herding is started by a bad actor or leading people in the wrong direction, and people using that same mental shortcut follow through and say, well, somebody's touting this particular investment or idea, and I would rather not just think. Instead of thinking about it, I'm just going to take a mental shortcut and just follow them. And it looks like there's a lot of other people doing it, and we follow them. And now all of a sudden we get what we call like a bubble, an asset bubble created. And what we're going to learn later is these bubbles invariably burst. And it's the people on the back end of that herding that are late to the party, and they're the first ones to get burnt. So it can be rational to ignore your own information. It can be rational to follow others because it saves mental energy. But some of the times that we do this, we have to be careful of if the intention is positive or negative. And then finally, we have what we call the wisdom of crowds. So the wisdom of crowds, it's the idea that a large group of people are collectively smarter than individual experts when it comes to problem solving, decision making, and predictions. A collection of people are generally smarter than individual, even experts, when it comes to problem solving, decision making, and predictions. So one of the things I do in class is I'll get a large jar of M&Ms and put it in a jar, or just take a monster bag and X out the math behind the servings per, and so you can't just see how many approximately are in here. Just get a monster bag and say, all right, friends, here is this bag of M&Ms. I want you to estimate how many M&Ms are in this bag, and the closest person to it gets the bag of M&Ms. And what's always interesting about this exercise is the average or the median or both are almost spot on every single time to the actual answer. It's uncanny how close those answers are. At the same time, nobody's actually right. So you have half of people on the high side, half of people low. Nobody in the crowd is right, but collectively they actually get an eerily close answer every time, compared to somebody who said, well, I'm an expert counter, I'm going to just make this prediction. And so we find this wisdom of crowds when we're making these predictions. Now, you might be asking, what's the difference between the wisdom of crowds where everybody's wrong, but we get to that right answer collectively, compared to how do you measure like a bias? So we talked about all these biases, but what's the difference between a bias and what we're talking about here? And the answer is, when we're analyzing a bias, usually we find a systematic measure of answers in one direction. So perhaps if we're talking about, my favorite thing is the exponential growth bias, when we're estimating everything low, so 90% of the estimates are lower than the actual answer. You go, well, that's not wisdom of crowds. There's a systematic underestimation of these exponential growth estimates that people are making. So it's not the case that 50% are high, 50% are low. That's the wisdom of crowds. The biases that we find are the systematic gravitation in one direction. And then we have the intuition behind it that can explain the bias. So in exponential growth, we have 90% of people underestimating. There's a minority of 10% that are overestimating. But then we realize the 90% consistently underestimating this is driven by their intuition of thinking in linear terms. And now all of a sudden, that's how we have our bias that we try to prove in different areas over and over again to make sure that it does hold up. And so the wisdom of crowds, we think about this in our day-to-day lives. We've got our going to a new city. So this is what I do, and it always seems to work out, is I will do a search and look for the restaurants that have the best reviews. And I don't like the real expensive ones, but give me a nice restaurant that may be a little bit out of the way. And I found 2 on my recent trip that have 5.0 ratings on Google reviews. And we have to be careful. You can't have 2 reviews that are 5.0, although that might be what my podcast was like at some point. Had 2 reviews, 5.0. So it could be really good. But we also, I want a nice sample size as well before I make my decision or drive a little bit out of the way to eat. But typically, whenever I find these really high reviewed restaurants, it's always a very, very good meal or a very good value or both. And so just following the wisdom of crowds, it saves me any more research. You just kind of lean on what people have experienced and move away from their bad experiences. Same thing that happens with our decision making. If we're buying something on Amazon or anywhere online, you really want to know, hey, are these reviews legitimate? What are they telling me? Is there a theme that I can pull out? Same thing if I'm buying a product or staying at a hotel, you can get a pretty good understanding of what the product or the hotel is like by the reviews that you see. Now, of course, you get the Karens saying that my towels were not fluffed enough and the linens weren't, and it's like, okay, well, they're not going to be happy in any scenario, and I'm not really, so I can discount that, but you get the idea. You get a general consensus around the quality, and usually it's my experience has been it's pretty consistent with what people are actually saying. So that's sometimes I usually don't stay at an Airbnb that doesn't have a large number of reviews, just to avoid that. And anytime I go there, they have good reviews. It's always a very good experience as well. So this wisdom of crowds is something that, once again, we can rely on and lean into in a positive way for the most part, even though nobody has a precise estimate or decision-making ability. All right. So I am going to stick a pin in it for now. And when we come back, we're going to round out our conversation on these social forces. And then after that, we're going to move into our retirement and retirement decision making. And then we round out the class or the foundational area of this podcast with some debiasing strategies and really this begins our phase of now taking what we've learned in this class and now digging into the application on how this is going to affect our decision making for life and for our finances. So thanks everybody for watching. If you need anything from me, like I already said, please make sure you reach out. Hit me up on Instagram, Facebook, bryanfoltice.com, and would love to hear from you. Would love to speak at your seminar or workshop or keynote speech, class, whatever you need. I would be happy to serve you. Hope you're benefiting from this podcast, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful day and a great week. We'll see you later.